Hi everyone. Unfortunately, I cannot be with you in class today, so instead I have left behind this wonderful video full of lectures because after all, a day without government notes is like a day without sunshine. And a day without sunshine is like night. Think about it. Now, by this point, you hopefully have already completed your quizzes. And if you haven't, let's take a minute to pause the video before I go over the answers and accidentally reveal everything. So, if you haven't taken the quizzes already, let's pause the video now. Okay, now that we've all taken our quizzes, let's go over the answers together. Number 1, these are the voters in a specific state or district. The correct answer would be, let's all shout it out together, constituents. Number 2, these are the projects for specific districts paid for by general revenue, pork barrel. Number 3, the idea that an elected body should demographically mirror the population it represents, descriptive representation. Number 4, the additional votes a congressional candidate might receive simply because he is from the president's party, coattail effect. Number 5, a reallocation of congressional seats would be reapportionment, not apportionment, reapportionment. Number 6, redistricting to favor a specific group of people would be gerrymandering. Number 7, the electoral edge offered to those already in office, incumbency factor or incumbency effect, whichever one it is. The ability of Congress to investigate agencies to see if they are acting as Congress intends would be oversight or congressional oversight if you're feeling fancy. Number 9, the privilege of free mail services afforded to members of Congress would be the franking privilege. And the style of representation that members of Congress need to stand on American ideals rather than specific projects or party views, that would be symbolic representation. And then number 11 would be your name, which, again, hopefully isn't news, but in case, there you go. So, there you go. Now, at least in theory, you have a rough idea of what grade you got on your quiz, and so I will hopefully get those graded and put them onto RenWeb at some point in the future. Yeah, you have another quiz next week. I'm reasonably sure it's on Wednesday. Double check RenWeb to prove me right or wrong on that one. Your test obviously hasn't been graded yet, and even if it was, I couldn't give it to you because I can't throw it through a screen. So you're not getting those back today, possibly Monday, if we're all very good boys and girls. You might get them back on Monday. You have a DBQ that's due really soon, I think. But again, check RenWeb on that one because I can't remember off the top of my head. Let's look at my calendar. Oh, no. Yep, you got another week on that one. Okay, so not due next week. That's always a good thing. So sorry if I induced panic in anyone there. Everyone take a deep breath. Now, on that note, today we're going to start off the next unit. Unit 6, which has to do with Congress. I've given Ms. Clark the outlines, which hopefully are going to be passed out any second now, so I'll give you all a minute to get your outlines while I refresh myself. Refreshing. Yeah. Oh, come on, I can't surprise you that I have those. Right. By now, hopefully you've gotten your outline out and your notebook out. And so let's go ahead and get going with Unit 6, all about Congress. So, let's get started. We start off at Roman numeral 1, which is who. Oh, right, sorry. Before I go. Again, just as a reminder, feel free to pause, rewind, and so forth as you need to. We will probably get through Roman numerals 1 and 2, possibly further. It really depends on how long this takes, I don't know. And I will also attempt to upload this onto YouTube, so if you would like to see it over the weekend because you missed the mellifluous sound of my voice, or because I went too fast and misstepped over something, because, you know, it's entirely possible that I go too fast on these notes, I know. Right, with that out of the way, let's get started. Roman numeral 1, who are these people anyway? For congressmen, the constant struggle is basically a balance between national lawmaking and representation. The reason for this struggle is that Congress basically has two masters to serve here. On the one hand, Congress is the national legislature. They are the legislative branch. They make the laws for the entire country. But on the other hand, they are not voted for by the entire country. They represent certain people, the people who vote for them. These people would be called their constituents. The term constituents refers to the members of a specific district or area who a senator or a congressman represents. Again, you're talking about the people from a specific area, like a state or a district, that a senator or representative represents. Again, people from a certain area or district or state that a congressman, be it a senator or a representative, represents. So, for example, take Senator Burr. Senator Burr is from North Carolina, so all the people of North Carolina are his constituents. When he goes off to the Senate, he is supposed to be representing our views. However, the laws he passes affect the entire country because that's the way the Constitution works. You don't pass laws for just one state, they apply to everybody. But this, of course, creates an inherent conflict. Again, take Senator Burr. If a tax came up that would be like, say, 400% tax on tobacco and cigarettes that would use to be funding healthcare, well, that would probably be a good thing for the country. It would help, cut down on smoking, which would make healthcare better, and so forth. But the problem is, Senator Burr represents North Carolina, and what do we grow? Tobacco. So, what does he do in that case? Does he do what's good for the country and increase the tax, or does he do what's good for his constituents and say, no, tobacco must be grown for forever? And therein lies the problem. Most congressmen have to try to find the balance between national lawmaking and representation. They have to balance the needs of their constituents versus the needs of the country. How they do that gets you to these theories of representation. So the theories of representation basically are different philosophies that congressmen adopt and basically tells them or dictates what they should do in each scenario, what they should do in each case. So start first with policy representation. Congressmen who believe in policy representation basically believe that it's their job to represent the broad strokes of their constituents. These are the people who believe it is their job to be the conservative or the liberal. Rather than working on like a case-by-case basis or a state-by or issue-by-issue basis, policy congressmen believe it's their job to represent the broad ideals of their constituents. So, for example, again, someone from, say, North Carolina, which is a relatively moderate state, they believe that their job is to take the moderate stand on issues, protect farmers, the military, and shipping, because those are big industries for us. So again, they're not worrying so much about specific details on every issue, but rather the bold strokes, the broad strokes. Policy congressmen are much more likely to be found in the Senate because the senators have a little bit more job security, and so they deal with bigger issues and so forth, whereas the House of Representatives tend to be a bit more focused and narrow. So policy congressmen, that's your first one. Your second one, allocative congressmen. Allocative congressmen believe it is their job to bring money and resources to their constituents. Allocative congressmen believe it is their job to bring money and resources, and other resources, I should say, money and other resources to their constituents. Again, allocative congressmen believe it is their job to bring money and other resources to their constituents. So they want to bring jobs, they want to bring money, they want to bring energy, they want to bring attention. All of those could be considered resources. They want to bring those to their constituents. Allocative congressmen are very common because it's a very easy way to win re-election. Being an allocative congressman provides you with proof of your hard work. Say, for example, if you go to Washington, D.C. and you argue and argue and argue and argue on behalf of your on behalf of your people and their policies, but nothing ever happens, how do you prove that you've been a good senator? On the other hand, if you brought in $100,000 to build the new parking garage downtown, that's something you can point to. Hey, look, I got us $100,000, or I brought in 500 more jobs, or so forth. Look at like the current election, how they're hammering Governor McCrory over like numbers of jobs lost because of the HB2 bill, or how much money has been lost because of that, or how much money Senator Burr has brought in or lost because of his contracts with oil drilling and so forth. Allocative congressmen have something to point to. There's a dollar value, there's a job number, there's an object that they can point to and say, hey, look, I did that. So that's why allocative congressmen are very common, and it's a very popular strategy for congressmen to take, because again, there's proof of your hard work. Now, the problem is that when this gets out of hand and gets sort of ridiculous, you end up with what's called pork. Pork is a slang term usually referring to ridiculously unnecessary spending. Pork is a slang term usually referred to ridiculously Specific and unnecessary spending, I should say. So it's ridiculously specific and unnecessary spending. Ridiculously specific and unnecessary spending. Congressional money, like the tax dollars and so forth, is supposed to be used for the good of everyone. But congressmen will sometimes take this money and allocate it to their constituents. And again, sometimes that's necessary. For example, a representative might get money for Fort Bragg, which brings them to our district, but it's also for the good of the country. Pork is when this goes to sort of the psychotic extreme. For example, if the representative from Fayetteville got $500 million to build a statue of Braxton Bragg, that's a lovely thing to bring to our community, but I don't think it was worth $500 million of taxpayer money. Or there's a famous one where like Alaska built an island or a bridge to an island that had 30 people on it, and the amount of money worked out to something like $6 million for every person who lived on that island. For the congressmen and for the constituents, it's great because, again, money, jobs, attention, resources, all of that. But for the rest of the country, it's a problem because you're paying tax money that's going to things like researching the mud skipper over in Ohio because the senator wanted jobs to be brought to Ohio. So that's the downside of pork, or downside of allocative, is that when it gets out of hand, you end up with a lot of pork. The reason why it's called pork, and I would know this, is because basically it's the fat. It's the stuff that could be trimmed off the budget, but isn't. Much the same way that pork is a fatty meat, for those of you who don't eat it. The third style of representation, third theory of representation, casework. Casework representatives believe it's their job to help their constituents with very specific policies and very specific problems. So these are the guys who are working on a day-to-day basis for you as an individual constituent. So if you have a problem getting your passport, these are the guys to talk to. If there's a pothole that hasn't been filled on your street and you're angry, these are the guys you talk to. The casework representatives are the ones who want to deal with the nuts and bolts of their constituents, who want to deal with the day-to-day problems. Again, casework representatives are the ones who want to deal with the day-to-day problems, the nuts and bolts of their constituents. Day-to-day problems, nuts and bolts of their constituents. Again, that's the casework guys. The casework ones are much more likely to be found in the House of Representatives because in the House of Representatives, you represent a smaller group of people than the senators. Senators represent an entire state. Representatives only represent part of it. So again, take North Carolina. The senators from North Carolina represent all of us. Representatives only represent 1/13 of North Carolina. So it's a little bit easier. So it's a smaller group of people and much easier for you to know them and their problems on a much more intimate level. Say it that way, it sounds weird. But in any case, casework congressmen, again, very common in the House of Representatives, not so much in the Senate. Casework congressmen also tend to be the ones that get reelected a lot. Because just like how I said allocative congressmen have something to point to, casework congressmen have an advantage as well. We tend to remember the people that we've worked with personally. And so even if your congressman does something silly like donates a ham to a local charity, if you met him personally when he donated it and he shook your hand, you're much more likely to remember him and remember him when it comes to election day. So this is why casework congressmen do what they do. Well, cynically, I mean, you could say that they do what they do because they're trying to be nice human beings. But in reality, most of the time, the casework congressmen are the ones that are trying to do these things because it gets them attention on a personal level and makes it much more likely you'll remember them and vote for them. Fourth one, symbolic congressmen. Symbolic congressmen believe it's their job to represent the ideals of America rather than necessarily their specific constituents. Their job, again, is for the good of the country rather than the good of the constituents. Again, good of the country rather than good of the constituents. Now, that doesn't mean they ignore their constituents, but what their primary concern is rather what's good for everybody. So this goes back to that example I was talking about with tobacco. A symbolic congressman would say that even though it hurts my tobacco farming state, it's for the good of the country, so I'm going to vote for a higher tax on cigarettes. Symbolic congressmen are arguably the way it should be done because, again, they're supposed to represent everybody, not just the people who vote for them. But the problem with symbolic representation is, again, everybody doesn't vote for you. So, for example, voting to shrink the military is arguably a good thing because it lowers taxes and so forth. But in North Carolina, that'd be a terrible thing because military is a big job provider, Fort Bragg. So the downside of that is that it makes you more vulnerable in a re-election. Hence why symbolic congressmen tend to be more common in the Senate, because senators are served for a much longer time, so they've got more chances to prove themselves. And so one symbolic decision isn't going to run them into the ground. All right, the fifth one is the partisan. The partisan representation theory believes it's their job to represent the political party's interests. Partisan representation is that your job is to represent the political party's interest. Excuse me again. Partisans believe it's their job to represent the political party's interest. So when you elect them, you are not you're electing Senator, Guy Larson. You are electing Senator Republican or Senator Democrat. That's what you're doing. The idea behind partisan representation is that it's kind of like buying a brand. You know what you're getting. They're basically saying, you don't know me personally, but trust me, I'm a Republican, here's what we're going to do. Or trust me, I'm a Democrat, here's what we're going to do. So that way when you go into the voting booth and go, well, I don't know what he stands for, you simply know that he promises to do whatever the party says, and you know what the party's going to do. The reason why a lot of congressmen choose to be partisan is because the parties have the money. The political parties are the big financial guys, especially in like the House of Representatives and things like that. So if you cozy up to the political party, they can give you the money that you need for re-election. So unless you're independently wealthy, you probably need the party's backing. So it doesn't hurt. It doesn't help you if you start bucking them and doing whatever you feel like and ignoring what the party wants. The problem is that if you only do what the party wants, you basically just become a puppet, and what's the point of voting for, what's the point of having you in Congress in the first place? So partisanship can go too far, but this is why a lot of the congressmen do it, is because, again, they need money. That's the only way you win an election, is by having enough money to actually run ads and have a ground game and so on and so forth. So those are the 5 theories of representation. As you can probably guess and tell here, that these 5 don't always mesh well together, which brings us to collective responsibility. You've got these different competing theories of representation where everybody has a different idea for how Congress should act and what Congress's priorities should be. But at the end of the day, they have to work together for the good of everyone, because they are still congressmen, and it's still the goodness for everyone. So in other words, if they can't get along, if they can't come up with some sort of solution, nothing's going to happen. This is called gridlock. Gridlock is when nothing happens in Congress. Again, gridlock is when nothing happens in Congress. Gridlock is when nothing happens in Congress. The usual causes for gridlock are ideological problems, where again you've got these different theories of representation not meshing well together, and everyone sort of has their own idea for what should be done. Another reason for gridlock, a second reason for gridlock, would be if the House and the Senate don't agree. Because remember, both halves of Congress have to agree on a law before it can get passed. So if the Senate's Democrats and the House is Republicans, you have gridlock because the two halves aren't going to necessarily agree. You also get gridlock, like you currently do, when the president is from one party or one ideology and Congress is from a different one. The problem with gridlock is that, again, nothing happens, and that can be both good and bad. The good news is, again, no bad decisions are being made, but the bad news is no good decisions are being made. Gridlock in the long term is very problematic. In the short term, it can be okay. And again, there's some argument to be made that gridlock is better than making bad rush decisions. But the downside is prolonged gridlock will cause all sorts of problems. Okay, so that gets you through Roman numeral 1. Take a small breather, push the button for the next one in just a few moments. We'll go on to Roman numeral 2 in just a moment.